Well, welcome to this, the 15th, I think, in our series of P2 webinars. And today we're going to be looking at something that, judging by the number of people who are joining us, is something that's a real hot topic item out there in the world of transformation, and that's scaled Agile. So as those who've joined us before, you'll know we're going to talk for about half an hour about scaled Agile. We're going to do something slightly different this time, because usually we don't have time for questions, but what I'm going to do is I'll talk for half an hour and do the presentation for half an hour, and then if that's all you want to receive, you're very welcome to leave, but I will hang around for about 15 minutes or so afterwards and try and answer any of the questions that have come in. So if you do have questions, please do write them in. Whatever happens, we will of course send the recording of this out to you, and you're very welcome to share that or watch it as much as you want to after the event. Anyway, back to today's event, Introduction to Scaled Agile. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Adam Skinner. I'm Director of Consulting here at P2. There's me grinning on the right there, a photo that must have been taken pre-COVID. I'm a massive fan of Scaled Agile. I've been playing around with it for the last few years. I'm what's known as a safe program consultant, so I coach and deliver work in it, but I've also seen where it goes right and seen where it goes wrong. So I'm a massive fan of safe and scaled Agile, but I'm also very wary of what can and can't go wrong. I'm going to try and share some of that with you today. Before we dive into that, let me just introduce you to P2 for those who haven't come across us before. We are the world-leading digital transformation consultancy, set up about 7 years ago now to be a real competitor to the Big Four. We pride ourselves on helping our customers, helping our clients deliver on their transformation ambitions through our 3 promises: to improve, to control, and to deliver on those promises. And we do that through the 12 services you see listed there. Of course, today we'll be talking about one very specific service, which is that of scaled Agile in the improve promise area. So what are we going to cover today? Well, today we're going to look at 4 things really. Firstly, why scaled Agile? You know, there is a lot of effort going just to pure Agile, let alone to scaled Agile. So why would I even bother with that? So we'll talk a bit about that. Then we'll dive into what it actually is. Now, usually this is a 2-day course, so we can only really brush the surface. But I'll talk a bit about what I think are the really important tenets of scaled Agile. We'll touch a bit on how one implements scaled Agile. Then there's a very structured format for doing that. And finally, I'll share a few war stories, share a few thoughts about what goes wrong when one tries to do this, and how does one avoid that happening. As I say, that should take us about half an hour, and then I'll hang around for a bit to answer any questions that have come in. So let's begin at the beginning. Why on earth would anyone bother with the effort of implementing scaled Agile? Well, in this day and age, there's no doubt that digital is fundamental to everything we do, and actually in this year more than anything, it's an absolute truism, and it's become a bit of a boring statement now, but you know, many famous people have been saying that we've actually accelerated our digital transformation by about 10-15 years thanks to the last year. But even before COVID, digital was fundamentally important. Some of you may have come across Mick here, who's a fascinating writer. He wrote this book in the bottom right, Project to Product, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the term product owner, product management, but what it means is actually a very fundamental shift in how you think about change. Anyway, great book, well worth a read if you get the chance. But Mick basically says this: those who master large-scale software delivery will define the economic landscape of the 21st century. Now that is a hell of a bold claim. What on earth does he say to back that up? Well, if you look at some of the really big new organizations that have come along, really, I'm thinking of your Amazons, I'm thinking of your Teslas and the other. Quite frankly, they've got a huge market cap. But the really interesting thing is they've got a huge market cap. They've done hugely well, not just through delivering their core services, not just through giving better IT. So for instance, that great quote at the bottom there: Apple is now the biggest watchmaker in the world. Think about that for a second. You know, 6 years ago, Apple did not even touch watches. Now it's the biggest watchmaker in the world. Tesla has a much larger market cap than Ford. Amazon is now delivering food. I mean, incredible stuff. And this one at the top's fascinating. So BMW spends more of its money on R&D stuff than it does on pure manufacturing staff. Think about that. The majority of the value that sits in a modern BMW is in the computing systems, into the code, into everything that sits behind that dashboard. The point I'm trying to make is it's clearly a fairly obvious one, but it's a really important one to dwell on, is that most of these organizations make huge amounts of money based on the fact that they are able to leverage their digital ambitions, their coding ambitions, their understanding of how code, of how technology can support them to deliver to their customers. And they're not just doing that in their traditional heartland of creating nice IT. They're actually eating everybody else's lunch from that. As I say, that incredible Apple quote at the bottom there. They are eating everybody else's lunch by getting a better grip on how they deliver digital. There's a chap here called Dean Leffingwell. Now, Dean is the creator of SAFe. SAFe is the organization that basically owns Scaled Agile. Scaled Agile, as we'll come on to talk about a bit, is one of the most popular Agile methodologies to be delivered at scale. Now, Dean's obviously thought an awful lot about this, and this for me is just a great quote. Every business is a software business now. Achieving a state of business agility means that the entire organization, not just the bit in it that worries about IT, is engaged in continually and proactively delivering innovative business solutions faster than the competitors. Critical phrase there, innovative business solutions faster than the competition. Because what he's basically saying is, look, if you're a pharmaceutical company, you're not going to stop creating good pharmaceutical products. However, your competitive market edge comes from your ability to get a better grip on the digital aspects of your business. That is where the competitive advantage over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years is going to be sitting. And even more fundamentally, if you don't get a grip on that competitive advantage, on that digital aspect, somebody else will, and they are going to eat your lunch. And if you've got the time and can go into the background of this, you start to see some comparisons between what's gone on in previous industrial revolutions. So classic equivalents is people who got a grip on the sort of the Ford conveyor belt methodology of making and producing manufacturing in a standardized fashion. If you didn't do that, someone else did to your business and they ate your lunch. Similar thing with Scaled Agile, similar thing with business agility. So it's a fundamental aspect. It's a fundamental to get a grip on how it delivers transformation, how to its digital front end. Because if we can't do that, we will really struggle as an industry going forward. So that is the case for why something like Scaled Agile. Sounds great, wonderful. How can I sign up? Well, what is Scaled Agile? This is probably the most important slide in the entire presentation, because a lot of people do come and get involved in Scaled Agile, and they come into one of these talks and they leave slightly disheartened, because brutally honest, what they were expecting was something similar to Prince 2. They were expecting a process, a methodology, a couple of steps that explains how you agile your business. That is not what this is, not by any state of the imagination, because what SAFe is a knowledge base of proven principles, practices, and competencies for achieving business agility by implementing lean, agile, and DevOps at scale. There's a lot there, so let me unpack that. What SAFe is made up of is principles, i.e. ways of working, i.e. mindsets, practices, and that is where you get to a number of sort of steps and tools and the like, and competencies, which is inbuilt skills that people have to adapt. Combining those three things, you may achieve a state of business agility. You do that by using three major methodologies that already exist out there. Lean, which is about trying to deliver things much more efficiently and effectively. Agile, which is about trying to deliver stuff in iterative chunks so that you can fail faster, get it delivered in smaller bits and get value out quicker. And DevOps, which in my opinion actually is always the bit that comes last, but quite frankly should be coming first, because for me DevOps is the thing that really fundamentally changes how businesses work. And it's actually, in my opinion, the hardest bit to get properly in, because you need both the systems as well as the ways of working and the skill set. But DevOps is really about how can I make sure as I am deving stuff, as I'm building stuff, I'm also getting it tested and ready to roll smoothly out so I can do continuous integration, continuous import, deployment, and release on demand. Lean, Agile, and DevOps. So we aren't going to be talking or at any point presenting you with a simple, you do this, do that, do the other, tick that box and flip that switch and you're suddenly scaled agile. There's a lot more under the system than that. This is what we call the safe big picture. And again, it's one of those things that when you stick in front of people, it's a bit of a oh moment, but it's actually quite simple when you start to break it down. As long as you understand that it's not a series of process. It's made up of a series of images and ideas that represent the practices and the methodologies and the like. The way you access this tool is you basically understand that these things down here are the competencies. These are the fundamental ways of working that underpin SAFe, and we're going to dive into those in a bit later. So lean portfolio management, agile product delivery, and so on and so forth. It's also carved up into 3 rows. So this is what they call essential SAFe. It's basically how do you run a load of agile teams together in a sensible fashion using something called an ART, an agile release train. That's the essential function. You also have a large solution layer, which says, okay, great, I want to do this across the entire business. It's a really big business. I need to run a whole load of arts together and have suppliers on the side. Great, that you need to use your large solution approach. And then at the top, you have lean portfolio management. Okay, I got my arts working. How do I make sure I am deciding the organization's strategy in a scaled agile fashion? And that's what this portfolio management layer is doing. And then down this side here, you have the different roles at the different levels. And then along the bottom, you have a range of things, it's probably the best way I can describe it, that come under lean agile leadership. The values of agile, what the lean agile mindset, which is a way of thinking about lean agile, safe principles, which we're going to dive into, implementation roadmap, which you're going to dive into, and finally, safe program consultants, which are people trained in this. Those are the main structures of the big picture. And then inside you have various tools and techniques and ways of working, such as design thinking, Kanban boards. We're going to come into this later, but sort of program increments that you can synchronize in Cadence and the like. So there's nothing too scary here. It's not a map, but what it does, it gives you the major points you need to worry about in terms of building a scaled agile way of working. So let's get into some of the detail of scaled agile. These are the 7 competencies that make up scaled agile, that make up business agility, with customer centricity at the center of it. And as a quick reminder, these are the things around the outside. Now I'm going to do a deep dive into 2 of these. I'm going to do deep dives into team and technical agility and into agile product delivery, and I'll touch on the others given time. But these are the 2. When people think about scaled agile, it's usually these 2 that people have in mind. So team and technical agility. Well, what is team and technical agility? Well, in my head, it's the way that you should be structuring your agile teams and grouping them to make them into a community that can deliver something in an agile fashion. What do I mean by that? I basically mean, and here I'm going to jump down to this. So here you have your team and technical agility competency, and each of those competencies are made up by 3 disciplines. In this case, you've got the agile team, which is made up of project owner, scrum master, and other people. You have a concept called built-in quality, which is about operating in a way that builds quality into what you're creating, establishing flow, working in pairs, automation, being clear about your definition of done. And down here, teams of agile teams, how do you group those agile teams in a way that they construct the agile release train? So that first competency is looking at how can I build the people that sit within the agile release train? What does that look like? What are they kind of doing? The second competency, agile product delivery, then says, okay, so you know who's in the agile release train, you know who makes up that agile release train, you know their basic ways of working. How should they be operating to coordinate across themselves? And how should they be operating in a way that puts the customer at the center? The actual official line here, why agile product delivery? In order to achieve business agility, enterprises must rapidly increase their ability to deliver innovative products and services to be sure that the enterprise is creating the right solutions for the right customer at the right time. The word right is critical there. They're talking about making sure the customer's at the center, and they're making sure they're doing it in a correct manner so everything is coordinated. So if you look here, the 3 disciplines, you have design thinking to put customer at the center of it. You have DevOps, which allows you to continually deploy code so it can be released on demand. So you have this continual release cycle. And then up here, and we're going to do a deep dive into this because I think this is a really important bit. How do you develop on Cadence? How do you release on demand? What are the mechanisms and the processes and the events that help one coordinate across a range of different Agile teams? So those are those two. Enterprise solution delivery is basically about how then you hook together a whole load of arts and bring in suppliers. Quite frankly, that very rarely gets used, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Lean portfolio management is a fascinating area, and it talks about how do you do portfolio strategic alignment based on Agile methodologies. Again, an absolutely fascinating area. There's no way I can do it justice in a couple of minutes, so I'm not even going to try. Organizational agility, the ways of working that go beyond just your transformational teams. How do I work with HR? How do I work with finance and others to ensure that they are living Agile? Continuous learning culture. Anybody who knows about Agile knows that it's all about continuous improvement and allowing failure to occur so you can get better. That only works if people are willing to learn and people are willing to continually challenge themselves. So that's what continuous learning culture is trying to implement. And lean Agile leadership. The only way you can do an Agile transformation is if the people right across the board who are leaders are living and breathing it. And that's why it's the absolute center of everything is lean Agile leadership. How can we make sure the leaders of the organization are living and breathing and acting in the way that everyone else should be following? Lean Agile leadership. However, as I say, the bit that most people focus on is team and technical agility. How do we build an art? Agile product delivery. How should that art operate to make sure it's coordinated and to make sure it is delivering value to the customer? So there we have, back to the Agile big picture, team and technical agility. Basically, how do I build my arts? Product owner, scrum master, and the senior figures who lead the art. Agile product delivery. How do I operate it in a way that it's coordinated and continuously delivering into the business? Okay, so that's the big picture. We've got a little bit of time now, so I'm going to dive into the lean Agile principles. And these are really important. These are kind of the fundamental framework that everything else is going to be built from. I'm going to focus on 3 of these because I think those are the 3 that probably tell a best story about how scaled Agile works. So I'm going to focus on taking an economic view. That is, how do you make sure you are building something that is aligned to the values of the organization and is done in a way that maximizes those values? Apply Cadence synchronized with cross-domain planning. In a nutshell, that's PI planning. How do I organize across my Agile teams and plan so that there's a semblance of coordination across them, but without destroying their ability to deliver in an Agile fashion? And finally, decentralize decision making, which looks at how do I ensure that the decisions are taken as close to the coalface as possible, where the knowledge actually sits. So taking an economic view is basically sitting there and saying, if I'm delivering in a waterfall sense, I'm doing my requirements, doing my design, implementing an unverified system, verifying it, and then unboxing. The real value of Agile economics is you're able to deliver stuff often and incrementally, delivering early and often. So as I deliver each small bit, I'm getting to value much, much faster. Fundamental tenet here. So I'm delivering a bit of the system as we go along. That allows me not only to deliver value, but to check it works. So this is obviously a diagram of the value being created. As I deliver each increment, the value is getting straight into the business. Fundamentally, I'm getting fast feedback to know what I should be doing differently. Whereas you compare that to a waterfall world, value gets hit at the end. And if you're lucky, there's a big spike of value, although I think we all know that realistically, it usually doesn't tend to give the value one expects or hopes. There's also issues because you haven't been able to properly test until you've got the whole thing. And that's a really important part of DevOps, is actually being able to build the testing in nice and early so that you're testing small chunks of code rather than having to do a big lump of code months after it was actually originally coded. A really important part of scaled Agile there. So when I'm delivering in an economically sensible fashion, I'm attempting to deliver early and often, because the other really important thing is actually, of course, the value of a feature decreases over time or could totally disappear if a competitor gets there first. So again, you've got this value. There is real value in delivering early and often, because actually you can get a product out when it's still hot in the market. The market value of a feature over time dropping, Agile cumulative gross margins going up, waterfall bringing it in at the end, but having less value because the market has reduced the value of that product. So in an absolute nutshell, delivering economic value is about trying to deliver early and often and learning as you go.
Now we're on to the real heart of PI planning. And that's around cadence and synchronization. So a lot of the challenge that often gets thrown at Agile is that it is uncoordinated. And I think a lot of that has come from the fact that it's actually quite hard to coordinate Agile teams, to get Agile teams working together so that they're managing the dependencies between them and so on. Now, Scaled Agile really majors on this, and it makes a massive deal about the importance of cadence. So cadence is actually having a regular drumbeat of formal governance sessions and frameworks and events so that one knows what's going to happen, one can predict it, and one can kind of deliver small chunks of value within those events. And that's why we talk about 2 weeks for each program increment. We talk about program planning sessions happening every 3 months, and so on. And synchronization, and that's about saying, okay, we've got a load of different Agile teams. How do we synchronize across them to make sure they are working together? So cadence is about regular events. Synchronization is about making sure all those regular events for the different teams are coordinated so everybody comes together. And that's what drives the PI plan events. I'm sure many of you will have heard that term, because in some ways it's kind of the secret sauce of Scaled Agile. And if you've been lucky enough to attend one, they really are, particularly if they're done well, quite magical events. At those sessions, all of the Agile teams and everyone involved in Scaled Agile gets into the room, suppliers, the architects, so on and so forth. And they basically discuss what needs to be done, what are the technical restrictions they need to work within, what are the goals of the program, and then they start to break that down. They break into their individual teams and say, okay, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to try and deliver in a period of time. Then they come back together and they say, well, actually, can we all do this? Is it coordinated correctly? And if you've got a problem, you can go and talk to other teams, and you can stand and say, actually, I've got a resource problem here. What am I going to do? Bish, bash, bosh. And everybody tries to solve it. So you get everybody in the room, you do one take. You come back the next day and you try and do it again based on the challenges that have come out over them. So you get 2 bites of the cherry. Basically, you're supposed to keep doing it. Really, it's 2 bites tends to does it. And at the end of the session, everybody has to stand up and say, do we actually believe this? Do we have confidence we are going to deliver this plan? And if they don't, go back to square one. There's a really important thing there. So as you say, the key points here, all stakeholders meet face to face. You set the mission. Requirement and design happens in that room. That discussion happens in that room. Really important stakeholders are there to sign up to it all. And really importantly, the teams create and take responsibility for the plan that they have defined. It really is quite a special event, really well worth trying to do, even if you're in a waterfall, quite frankly. So there we have 2 days of events, setting out in the morning of day one, the kind of general vision and the stuff you're doing. Afternoon, you look at, you actually try and create that plan in your team breakouts. Management gets together in the evening, come back together the next day, and you do your planning adjustments. You break out again, final plan review. Then, once you've got that plan, you talk about your risks, what's going to cause us problems. You talk about your confidence levels, and you rework if you have to. And then you all go out and celebrate after the event. And that's just one of the events that ties Scaled Agile together. And what's really interesting about this is you'll see at the outside level, this is at the arc level, the outside surface saying what are the major events at the what are the major events you're going to be going through at the arc level. So you've got scrums and syncs to keep all the different Agile teams together. You've got system demos, you've got preparation for PI planning, you've got inspect and adapt. That's actually quite important. So that's the final Agile increment, the final 2 weeks, which is actually always a spare 2 weeks. And this allows you to go in and have a think about what you've done. It allows you to fix any problems, and it actually gives you a bit of extra time if you haven't quite been able to complete everything you wanted to. and then you go into PI planning. And all of those points, all of those events at the program level, the art level, are mirrored at the team level, at the Agile team level, with the daily stand-ups, iteration review, so have we created what we wanted to, refining the backlog, which is similar for preparation for PI, doing a retro, which is when you sit down and say what worked, what didn't work, and they're back into planning to plan the next one. And there's something lovely, I think, about this kind of mirroring at the team level and at the program level. Whenever anyone challenges me and said Scaled Agile doesn't have control, I stick this in front of them and say, actually, it does, and it's really, really clever. When it works, it's absolutely magical. So we've talked a little bit about why the economic value, why Agile, why is it so important, why it's so helpful. We talked a little bit about the program events that build up one's art and one's way of working. Let me just touch very quickly on decision making, because it's a final really important point. Decision making for me is about, well, what is centralized and what is decentralized as a point of discussion. Because there are some questions that just simply have to be taken centrally. There's some questions, there's no getting away from it. You have to take them centrally. And what Scaled Agile says is actually, okay, if it's an infrequent question, if it's a long-lasting, so what technology platform, and if it's a major strategic, economic, and scale one, it should be taken at the top level. Anything else decentralized. If it's frequent, if it has to be done quickly, if you need local information, that needs to be decentralized. And one of the things I see used very effectively are decision-making frameworks, which kind of give examples of the sort of decisions that get taken at the center and the sort that should be taken by the Agile teams and by the art teams. It's a very powerful tool there. It's worth doing, even if you aren't using Agile, just trying to get examples of the sort of questions and sort of decisions that should be taken at different levels. So we've talked through three of those, taking an economic view. We've talked through, excuse me, applying cadence and synchronization, and we've talked about decentralizing decision making. As I say, there's actually a 2-day course that allows you to go through all of these in more detail, and in fact, you do a PI planning sort of test session, so you basically recreate a PI planning event on the second day, which is really worth doing if you get the chance to talk about it a bit later. But those three are the ones I think really give a good feel of how Scaled Agile works and where the magic lies. Scaled Agile has this thing called the implementation roadmap, which kind of talks you through the major steps you're going to go through. So actually getting people really engaged with the training, starting off by getting a group of people bought into it, identifying the value streams. The value stream we haven't even talked about. The value stream is a really important part. It's basically trying to say, where does value come in the business? What are the steps that deliver value in this business? What are the products? What are the services, and so on and so forth? The value streams are how you work out what you're going to change and whether it's worth changing. Create the implementation plan, you launch an art, you launch more art, you go up to the portfolio level, and then you just accelerate. Very structured way of doing it and quite powerful. So look, what's going to go wrong? Well, actually, quite a few things can go wrong. It's not easy to do at all. At P2, we talk about the 4 stages of scaling, because actually most of the time my conversations are not, isn't Scaled Agile fun? It's, oh, you've tried Scaled Agile and it's gone wrong. Let's work out why and how we can fix it. And actually, there's really 4 areas I find it goes wrong. It either goes wrong at stage 1, which is called Agile in name only. In other words, you've tried it, you've done a load of training, you've changed everyone's names, nothing is different. And that's usually because you haven't really kind of bought into it. People have just changed their names and have kept doing the same processes and activities. Or stage 2, scaled dev failed ops, and that's usually when you've actually got the process working, but all the blocks of code are getting chunked up because the testing isn't going effectively. Until you're really able to automate testing correctly, you're not able to flow that code out naturally into the business. I call that scaled dev failed ops. Stage 3 is quite interesting, is when you've got your whole DevOps working really smoothly, suddenly you realize you haven't got any more change to do. You're actually, all you're doing is minor stuff around the side, and I call that the empty hopper. And that's usually a problem at the strategic level. It's a problem that actually the good ideas aren't flowing down into the business. And finally, transformation, not organizational agility. Your change is working well, but actually it's getting gummed up when it's talking to finance, it's talking to HR, it's talking to business. That's when you really need to embrace organizational agility, not just transformational agility. I'm sure everyone on this call is probably looking at that and recognizing some of the challenges that potentially they're facing. Agile in name only really is the classic. You see that time and time again. But then why bother? Well, actually, the results speak itself. I mean, you've got 35% increase in productivity, 50% defect reduction, 50% faster time to market, and 30% happier, more motivated employees. I mean, when it works, it really does work, and it allows you to kind of replay with the big boys in that first deck, you know, your Amazon Watchmaker and that. There's some great case studies if you want to find industries like yours that have done this down at the bottom there, and that's source scaledagile.com case studies. So do go and check that out. And I should say, actually, a lot of the slides in this deck have come from Scaled Agile. Given I'm a Scaled Agile program consultant, I don't use them, but actually there's a load of good stuff on that website that you should definitely check out if you want to learn more about this. And of course, there's also training. So Leading Safe is the classic. That's the 2-day course I was talking about. If you want to get a bit more into it, Implementing Safe is a 4 or 5-day course with an exam at the end. In fact, I think they've all got exams at the end, actually, so they take it very seriously, believe me. But to do this, Implementing Safe allows you to be a consultant, allows you to train and coach other people in it. And then based on the particular flavour of work you're doing, there's a whole range of other training you can do. Safe for Government, there's a really interesting one. And as I say, Lean Portfolio Management, one of my favourites, really fascinating area, because actually as you do it, if you go with your community or your company, during the course, you also build a lot of the artifacts you need. So look, that is an absolute whistle-stop half-hour tour through what is usually a 2-day talk. I'm fascinated in this area. I love it. Do feel free to drop me a note if you want to hear more about it. Up in there's my email address in the top left, adam@p2consulting.com, and there's my LinkedIn. I'm going to hang around for about 50 minutes or so. So any questions, do feel free to ask me. And of course, feel free to join us for the next 2 webinars, where it's going to be, again, a slightly different tweak. So we're going to be joined by some really interesting outside guests. So in a couple of weeks' time, we've got Peter Hazelwood, Group Financial Crime Risk Director from Aviva, who's going to be talking to Phil, our CEO. And then after that, a friend of mine, Ben Clinch, who's Global Head of Business Data Architecture at SBC, is going to be talking about data architecture and storytelling, actually. How do you get people excited about architectural transformations and the use of data? How can you get them hooked into it when you're trying to do a big architectural transformation? That's it from me, really. I shan't be insulted if you drop off now, but otherwise I am ready to take questions. And the first question is, okay, that's an interesting one. How long does a scaled agile transformation usually take? I mean, that's a great question. That's kind of the only one that really matters here, really, isn't it? How long is a piece of string? I suppose that would be a good answer. And, you know, I've seen scaled agile transformation in some very big organizations be continuous. I mean, they just continue to accelerate and try and get better as they go. The real answer is, how can you get to a practical point? Let me jump back to this slide, if I may. So look, there's an initial bit of getting people trained and excited and bought in. And there's absolutely no point trying to do this unless you manage to get a good community, what we call the guiding coalition, and their kind of community around them excited. Now, you've probably got a month or so of that. There's coaching, there's training, and you really need to take people's sense of whether it's the right thing to do. Once you've got that, it's probably a couple of workshops that's allowing you to get the value streams, a bit of wider training to get the art set up and organized, and then you're away. Realistically, what you want to do is run one art through one full program increment, and that program increment is usually about a 3-month period. So try and get 2 PI planning events over a 3-month period. Once you've done that, you can probably justifiably say you're doing scaled agile, and you'll find out what's gone wrong and what's gone right. A really interesting thing that tends to happen here is once you've done those PI planning events, word gets around and people tend to want to attend. It's not uncommon to have to kind of restrict the number of people who come to watch PI planning events because they are quite exciting. So usually, as I say, you've got a kind of month or 2 getting everyone geared up. You can kick off that first PI planning event. You've got 3 months actually delivering on the PI, on the actual program increment, and then you run a second one of those, and then I think you justifiably say you're away. And at that point, you've really got 2 options. Do you keep pushing forward with that single art? Do you try and stand up another art? If you could stand up other arts, do we then need to move up into the lead portfolio space? All entirely up to you, entirely up to the appetite of the organization. But one thing I would say is you can't force scale that to other people. You have to make sure they are pulling it rather than having it pushed onto you. So one of the ways of working at Scaled Agile is actually to do a voluntary rollout. You basically invite people to the PI planning event, and you let them say, "We like this. Actually, we want to do this in our area." So much more powerful if you can do that. Okay. PI planning, yes. So someone's asked me if I can go back to the program and just go through this in a bit more detail. Yeah, let me do that, because this is a really useful image, and it kind of gives you all the magic that sits under Scaled Agile. So let's talk about the program. When I talk about a program, I'm basically talking about the art level, and the art, the Agile release train, is a group of different Agile teams together. Now, the art is usually around 120 people. It can't be more than, it can't be too big. It has to be under what's called Dunbar's number, which is basically the number of people who can feel connected together based on the size of villages in the Stone Age, I think, or something equally interesting like that. So the art, as I say, about 120 people, made up of, whatever, 10 Agile teams if you want. And at the art level, you have your ongoing synchronization event, which is the scrum of scrums and the and the product owner sync, which you can do together as one art sync. So that's getting together over 2 weeks or so to check everything's on track. You're doing your system demos to evidence that everything is coming together as one should expect. Then as you get to the end of that PI planning event, you're preparing for the next one. You're doing that in the final 2-week program increment. So the final, let's call it the final sprint. You are doing that. You're also doing what's called inspect and adapt. Basically, you're using that 2-week period to fix any problems, to do any final stuff that you haven't managed to do, that you've had to push out of the earlier sprints, to review what you've done over the past 3 months and check it was good stuff, and to get ready for your PI planning. So the PI planning event actually happens in that 2 weeks. So towards the end of that, you do your PI planning event, and then that gets you geared up for the next, excuse me, 6 planning increments, the next 6 sprints, if you will. Now then at the sprint level, and this is this internal circle, you're mirroring that. So within each 2 weeks, you've got your daily stand-ups, where you're going to do your keep in touch. You've got your iteration review, where you're seeing what have we created within this team in this 2-week period. You're doing your backlog refinement, getting ready for the next iteration. You're doing your retro, what worked, what didn't, what are we going to do different, and you're doing your planning for the next 2-week chunk of time, and you're away. So you have this lovely mirroring of events at the team level and at the program level around the outside here. So let me just go back and then one more question around the big picture. Can I talk about some of these bits in the side? So down here is essentially the essential level here. And in here are the various tools you would want to do to run your art. Now, again, there's all sorts of stuff that sits behind this, obviously. It's not just these pictures, but customer centricity in design thinking is really what I call the double diamond. So it's a way of looking at problems and solutions. So you have this first diamond, which is opening up the problem, second diamond, which is going to a solution. But it's a way of trying to say, make sure whatever you're building, customer mindset and customer centric tools to make sure you're building something with a aligned tool. Use your Kanban board in your backlogs, which are the 2 key tools. The Kanban board obviously says what's being done where. The backlog lists the features that you're trying to deliver and the activity within the different sprints. And you have a team backlog and you have a program backlog. You are using Scrum methodology to deliver within each of those sprints. And then this image here is showing the program increment. Program increment is broken down into individual iterations, that's those 2 chunks. And in those iterations, you're building enablers, features out of your various stories, which are coming together as system demos at the top to show that the art is doing what it needs to do within each of these PI planning, these program increments. You are trying to do it in a way where you're continuously exploring, integrating, and deploying, and then releasing on demand. And finally, here are some tools you're trying to use. Built-in quality, which is basically about pulling testing as far as left as you can and making sure quality is at the heart of what you do. SAFe has a real downer on stage gating. It really is not a fan of stage gating and trying to retrofit quality, they call it. So they say, what on earth is the point of getting to a stage gate and then looking back and saying there's no quality in this? You have to be building in quality from the beginning. And DevOps, and as I say, DevOps has this little box here, Karma. Actually, I think it's vast, and I think it's much, much bigger than just this box it requires, but there are a whole load of ways of trying to implement a DevOps mindset, DevOps systems and tools. Anyone really interested in that, look, we've got a webinar on automation of testing available on the YouTube site, so go and have a look at that hit a lot more. Okay, and that's kind of what sits under there. Actually, the only other thing I'm going to mention up here is this measure and grow, and this is new to SAFe. But basically, it's a tool one can use to work out how safe is one's organization. And what you're supposed to do is every 3 months or so, you're supposed to redo that to check that you are improving your scaled agile, your SAFe mindset. Even if you're not interested in SAFe, it's worth downloading that, because actually it's quite interesting to do that for your organization, kind of work out where the gaps might be. I think that might be it for the questions. Well, look, thank you to everyone for joining us. As you say, Cadence, it's a topic I find absolutely fascinating. We do enjoy talking about. Do drop me a note if you'd like to hear more. Otherwise, hopefully you'll join us for the next webinar in a couple of weeks' time. Have a wonderful rest of your day.